Hello! Thought I would share my experience last weekend at a gameZfestival in Zürich, Switzerland. It's called the gameZfestival. It's held every year, organized by the gameZfestival Association, the Game Lab, and the Game Design Department at the ZDHK, Zurich University of the Arts. It was really a great weekend. I've seen so many cool projects and met so many cool people. One thing that stands out was a live fighting game. You'd go up, you'd have a Super Nintendo controller, then you'd have to choose your fighter, but these 6 fighters were actual people. It was a theater troupe, and then they would put on a headset and they would see the button commands you were pressing. So you'd have these 2 people live on stage in front of you, punching and kicking each other while their health bar on the screen would slowly go down. It's very much a mix of theater and video games, which I thought was interesting. And here at the Cologne Game Lab, the master's students also had a project where they had to mix video games and theater. So it's an intersection I haven't thought of much, but it has a lot of potential. And for me personally, perhaps the main reason I made the trip down to Zurich was because of Ryan Green, one of the developers of That Dragon Cancer, was giving a keynote presentation. So that was really cool to hear his story and talk with him about design. And he actually tested one of my games, which was really cool for me. So that was great. Another keynote presenter was an art director from Amanita Design, the people behind Machinarium, Summeroast, and all those games. They have a ton of games. They're an interesting studio because each member can become lead of their own project if they have ideas or something they want to do. So that was also cool. And one surprise, I had heard of 2 projects. One is Angelina. It's an AI that creates its own games based on certain parameters. And also the Proc Jam, which is you create a program that creates games. Apparently, these 2 projects are made by the same person, and I got to hear him speak as well. Other interesting things would be played an arcade game where you strap on a wristband with electric components, and when you punch an enemy in this arcade game, you feel a shock. So you got to control, when you hit the enemies, but then it also hurts you, which was a strange dynamic. It's an interesting concept that could be spun a couple of ways, I think. And that was part of an exhibit that was about the theme of game over or of death in video games. That was kind of the theme of the conference this year. There was also a block of presentations on non-human games, which is something I first heard of at the Canadian Game Studies Conference this year. At the CGSA, they talked more about making games for plants. In Zurich, they talked a lot about making games for AI or robots. For example, one game, it's not a game, this person created small bots that would go around, and then when they would want to go into a mating mode, they would spin really fast and flash lights so that other people would see the colors and evaluate if they would be a good mate, which was very strange, but interesting nonetheless. So throughout this exhibit, there were a bunch of Swiss indie games, and I find it's a really cool scene. I spoke with people a bit about the creation context, and I guess there wasn't much of a AAA development scene because there were no Swiss publishers. So in recent years, an indie scene has been thriving, and they're actually starting to found the first indie publishing house, Ibex. So interesting to see what they come out with. David Stark, alias Starkonen, has a couple interesting games. One is an airship game, which I've bought and I'm excited to try. And one is also a Mars immigration game, which is a mockery of Elon Musk's defense of Trump's actions. So I always like a good political game. That's interesting. Also, David was gracious enough to welcome me and show me around. So thank you so much, David. It was great. But yeah, it's very punk. There's a lot of games that, like the electrocution game, everything seemed really creative, and you also got to see a lot of Swiss particularities in the games. For example, one was kind of an alpine horror first-person game, and it was based a bit on the myths of the Alps. And another game too was based on Gottlieb, which is a traditional story of the area. So it's cool to see how the Swiss touch, if you will, can be found in these games. Also, it was just a fun time to discover Zurich and learn about the culture and the languages. It's interesting to see 3 or more languages on signs everywhere. There are some people in Canada who complain about 2 languages on packaging or signs, but well, try 3 or 4. It's just an interesting cultural landscape. And also, while hockey isn't very popular in Germany, apparently in Switzerland it's quite popular. So yeah, it was really cool to talk a bit about hockey with them. Everybody I met in the streets, at the festival, even when I was walking out in the wild, everyone was very friendly. So Switzerland was pretty cool. The games were really cool. So yeah, thanks for listening.